Welcome to the class today. For the online people who are taking this class, I've basically asked the class to open up Outline Cognitive Neuroscience Week 2, Outline B, and I've asked them to read the specific pages in Roman numeral number 6. We're going to kind of do, today is kind of a review day. We're going to add book material to what we've discussed in class, go over the test. I've decided that the results section, haven't had a chance to look at as many results. I know how many people in the class, raise your hands if you posted something, but I have not returned it. I usually get that back within a day, but coming up here twice a week, going to Virginia Tech 3 other times during the week, has made that a little bit more challenging, shall we say, for our lives. So the deadline for that, I will change that. The abstract will be due by Saturday at 6 p.m., and you basically need to have a draft to me. I don't know if you've already posted one. We'll say the draft deadline. What did we have for the draft deadline before? Today at 6? Does that still work for people? Yeah, why don't we still keep the draft deadline today at 6? At 6 p.m. Okay, so that'll kind of be actually today is Thursday. Let's make it Friday. And once you send me something, just try to send me, given the late time duration, let's not try to do multiple drafts. Try to send me your best shot now. I'll give you some critiques. Send me that email saying, I've posted this, I want you to look at it, because if you just posted it, you don't have any time for the weekend, I won't read it. You have to send me an email saying that is the case. So we're going to start off here with the outline and specifically focused. I gave different groups an opportunity to read some of these pages. Group number 1, if you guys want to share, Hannah and Lily, page 6. And if everybody wants to kind of turn to page 6, they talk about this field of phrenology. So what can you guys tell us about phrenology?
It all started with 2 men, Franz Joseph Gall, and he had sort of an assistant, Spurzheim, and they thought that different parts of the brain had to do with different functions, and if you practice those functions more, then your brain would physically grow in size, and you'd be able to feel it on the skull.
And so the idea would be, so I'll add a little bit to that. The big person for phrenology that everybody needs to know is Gall. Gall was the one who created this field of physiology. So how is this, and for the folks online, I've basically asked them to summarize what they read and then relate it to the class and things we've covered. So how would it be related to cognitive neuroscience? Is there any relationship to the field of...
So, because it's not like a real science. It's not.
So it's not being really scientific here in a way.
No.
And that's what people have critiqued. So it's not being real scientific. But, I mean, they were trying.
Yeah.
So
the history of it can be considered important, but the actual theories need to be dismissed.
Yeah.
So the validity, maybe you could argue, it's not really a valid idea. You can question it for phrenology, which is exactly the case.
Mm-hmm. Like it said, this guy Willis foreshadowed it by saying that isolated brain damage could result in psychological differences for the one part of the brain, but then that didn't get explained or expanded more by until Gall.
Exactly the case. So the idea here is that the tie-in to cognitive neuroscience, these were the first people to say, hey, the size of a particular area on your skull is related to how good you are at a task. Size and function. Get into debates about male anatomy on that, but that's not what this class is about. Okay, that was a bad joke. Sorry about that. So the idea is if a size of a particular area of the brain is large, and if you look at the pictures, it could be tied to that. So it was really the first attempt at cognitive neuroscience, the idea of cognitive function. If this area was larger, then that would mean that this function might in fact be better, as the case may be. Any comments or questions or anything else you guys would like to add to this?
One other important thing is that Gall was asked to read Napoleon's skull, and Napoleon was very displeased with his reading because he was not given the reading that he expected to be given. So he was very angry and demanded that the science of the subject be challenged. And through that, they found out that Gall was only seeking to prove the correlations that he found, not disprove them.
Yeah, and it's like we said, the lack of validity. It's funny when you mention Bonaparte, I think, what if they did the same thing to Trump? But that's another story entirely. And that was, of course, just a silly little joke. So the idea was not much validity behind the idea of phrenology, but it was really the first attempt at cognitive neuroscience where the structure and the size of a particular area. You can even add the term neuroanatomy. Anybody, do you guys know what neuroanatomy people study? The anatomy of the brain. So the idea is this area larger? That might mean this structure and this behavior might be better, this cognitive function. So it was the first attempt at that. Thank you very much. Any other comments or questions about that? Okay, very good. Let's move on to group number 2. We had you guys look at page number 8. And I wrote the word down, cytoarchitecture, because that's the word I like. They have cytoarchitectonics, cellular architecture, da-da-da. So can group 2, can you guys kind of say what this page was kind of talking about and any relationship to cognitive neuroscience here?
So this page is talking about cellular differentiation in the brain.
Cellular differentiation in the brain.
And how certain parts of the brain control or can be linked to certain parts of the body. So it's assigning regions of the brain to it's physiological responses in regions of the brain, which kind of links to the more specific regions like the occipital lobe and the prefrontal cortex. And then Fitch and Herzig did they did an electrostimulation on dogs that led to more investigation of the cerebral cortex and how that worked. And then Brodmann was one of the people that actually mapped the brain and came up with 52 regions.
Yeah, so maybe figure 1.9 is important here because figure 1.9 kind of has some maps going back to group 1 a little bit. What are they basically trying to do in figure 1.9 here? This area controls what?
This area controls this certain set of tasks.
Tasks or behaviors. So if you're talking about brain structure, that's neuroanatomy, that's the neuroscience part of it. And then if you tie it back to, this is why speech is good or this is good, that kind of ties it back to cognitive types of activity. So we've got that. And two of the people you really need to know here are, and it's on the top with figure 1.8, Broca and Wernicke. Were very, very influential here. Broca, has anybody ever heard of Broca's area? Does anybody know what is Broca's area? Let me ask our group 2. Broca's area, do you guys know anything about Broca's area?
Broca's area controls specific speech patterns and is typically affected after strokes.
So after a stroke, speech production. So this is really cognitive neuroscience. This structure controls this behavior, speech production. Wernicke, on the other hand, wasn't so concerned with speech production. Wernicke's area was more what?
Comprehension.
Yeah, listening and understanding. And so the idea is, okay, here's the listening part, and then here's the production part, and here is the connections. So figure 1.8 is a very simple kind of idea of almost, remember the philosophical issue we talked about a little bit? If you say, okay, here's the perception area where you understand speech, and then there's a little connection in the brain to the production area. What does that kind of remind you of in terms of mind-body types of things? Does that remind you of anything? So this structure controls this behavior. Very specific here, isn't it? Can anybody comment? Can you guys comment on? Can anybody else? We could ask for some help here for the rest of the class. Does anybody remember what issue this kind of maps back to a little bit? Mind-body issue. Here's a structure, here's an area, it controls this behavior. For the people on the recording, this is the class pause at this point in time. We wanted to give you guys at home a chance to do this, so the class is really helping you out here. What do we call this? And this is just the kind of questions you could get on said test. The idea that this structure controls this behavior. Say again?
Token reductionism?
Would it be token or would it be type reductionism?
I would be type, because token's not one-to-one.
Yeah, kind of the idea of, okay, speech production this area, speech perception that area. Very type reductionistic thinking here. It's a very type reductionistic in the thinking here. Okay, the other thing I wanted to add, going back to page 8, and the idea of cytoarchitecture. It's very interesting. I don't know if it'll come up so much in this class, but let me give you an example of cytoarchitecture. Is anybody good at a particular sport? Like, do we have any figure skaters in the class? Do we have anybody who's really good at a particular sport here in class? What are you good at? Softball. What particular aspect of softball are you good at? Hitting the ball?
Pitching.
Pitching. So for pitching, that's kind of a motor function. And you're really good at throwing the ball fast in an exact location. And so the idea might be in your brain for something like pitching. Does anybody know what area of the brain controls a lot of the motor functioning? It's actually the cerebellum controls motor functioning, if you want to write that down. It's the cerebellum. And the idea might be, if you're really good at pitching, the dendrites in your brain, the cytoarchitecture in your cerebellum might be highly well developed. That if somebody is not good at doing that, if I'm not so good at doing that, the cytoarchitecture in my brain might not be so good. So if you look at that picture on the bottom of 1.10, Golgi, some of the neurons have all sorts of dendrites. You could have another neuron that just has maybe 1 or 2 dendrites. So the term we use for that, and maybe I need to go to the board here. Dendritic arborization. What does that term mean, dendritic arborization? What is arbor? Tree. As you look at those pictures in there, what do they look like? They kind of look like trees. So for somebody who's really got a well-developed structure or function for a behavior, you might see all sorts of dendritic arborization. If somebody didn't, if I was really bad at softball or really bad at manual tasks, I might not have a lot of what? Dendritic arborization. So the cytoarchitecture of your brain, in many ways, might dictate what? What would that dictate? The cytoarchitecture might dictate cognitive function. So this is another example of kind of cognitive neuroscience, if you will. Is that? Oh, gotta get the recorder. Does that make sense for people? DA there. Okay, so let's kind of keep going here. Anything else you guys wanted to add to the equation here, or comments or questions in the class? Okay, thank you very much for doing that. Let's go to the next situation here. Page 13, Heb. So can you guys tell us a little bit about Heb and what he was up to here?
He was a Nova Scotian psychologist. He spent time working on a study to see the effects of brain surgery on behavior. So
brain surgery injury on behavior is what Heb studied. And what did he basically find?
He believed that psychology and biology could not be separated. And he found that learning had a biological basis. And that the brain is active at all times, not just during the stimuli.
So the brain is very active. So how does this tie to cognitive neuroscience? What is this philosophically sounding like?
It's tied to dualism.
Well, you could kind of say, why would you say dualism here?
Because they play together, you can't really separate them, that they go along with each other.
But if you say they play together and you can't really separate them, would that be dualism? Or would that be monism? Yeah, it would be much more monism. That Heb was one of the first people who really came up with the idea that, look, all behaviors and all mental functioning is mapped directly back to the brain. And he looked at things, and he really came up with this idea that you can map all these things doing his brain surgery back to functioning. Psychology and biology could not be separated. So not be separated would be your idea that it's not dualism, it's monism. And so he was really, psychologically speaking and historically speaking, one of the first people to really kind of come up with this idea. Anything else you guys would want to add to Heb and his ideas here?
He mentions that neurons can combine together into a single processing unit.
So say it one more time.
That neurons can combine into a single processing unit.
So neurons can combine to a single processing unit and maybe do cognitive activity. So once again, it's very much cognitive neuroscience here, because we're talking about neurons specifically in the brain relating back to cognitive activity. So chapter 1 is full of kind of this cognitive neuroscience, mind-body ideas, monism, type reductionism. He might be more token, but certainly the first folks were more type reductionistic. And the idea of here are the cells that work together to get these things done. Some of the other people mentioned there on page 13 are much more on the cognitive side of things, so I didn't bring them up in this particular case. Okay, so we got those pages. So we got, the first two groups? Let me